All right, today we are going to dive into a story from 14th century Italy that honestly sounds like it was made up for a comedy sketch. It's a tale of two major cities, bitter rivals, who went to war and left thousands of people dead on a battlefield. And the cause of all this? A bucket. Yeah, you heard me right, a plain old wooden bucket.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It's the kind of thing that makes you just stop and question everything. A brutal, bloody conflict over an object you could probably knock together in an afternoon. It's wild.
So was it really all about a bucket? Well, you've probably guessed it. The real story is always way more complicated and, frankly, a lot more interesting. The bucket wasn't the cause of the war. It was just the spark that lit this enormous powder keg that had been sitting there for generations. So, let's get into it.
To really understand why a simple bucket could lead to so much bloodshed, we've got to zoom out and take a look at the political scene in 14th century Italy. You have to remember, this place was chaotic, it was fragmented, and it was absolutely simmering with ancient rivalries.
Now, at the very heart of all this tension was this massive political split. On one side, you had the Guelphs, who were loyal to the Pope, and on the other, you had the Ghibellines, who backed the Holy Roman Emperor. But these weren't just some abstract political ideas. They became the banners for everything: local power struggles, family feuds, economic competition, you name it.
So our two main players here, the city-states of Bologna and Modena, were on totally opposite sides of this divide. Bologna was a Guelph powerhouse. It was bigger, richer, famous for its university. Modena, on the other hand, was a die-hard Ghibelline city, more aristocratic, fiercely loyal to the emperor, and run by this tough military leader. They were neighbors who could not have been more different, and they absolutely hated each other.
And look, this wasn't some new beef. For generations, their border was just a non-stop zone of low-level warfare. We're talking cattle raids, burning each other's crops, even kidnapping citizens for ransom. The hatred between these two cities was old, it was deep, and it was very, very personal.
Okay, so that brings us to the spark itself. Let's see how all this tension boils over from a bunch of provocations into a full-blown war. Because as you'll see, the bucket was really just the final insult.
You see, for months leading up to the war, Modenese soldiers had been getting bolder and bolder. They were raiding Bologna's land, burning farms, fighting over key castles. Then, one night, a group of them actually snuck into the city of Bologna itself, went to a public well, and just stole a wooden bucket as a trophy.
Let's be perfectly clear. This had nothing to do with the bucket's monetary value. It was worthless. The theft was pure symbolism. It was a calculated, humiliating taunt from Modena to Bologna, basically saying, hey, we can walk right into your city, take whatever we want, and you're too weak to stop us. Now, for a proud, powerful city like Bologna, that was an insult they just could not let slide.
So what happens? Bologna demands the bucket back. Modena refuses, and boom! Bologna declares war. And just look at the mobilization here. Bologna and its allies pull together this massive army of about 30,000 men. Modena and its friends, they can only scrape together about 7,000. On paper, this should have been a complete and total blowout.
But as you can probably guess, medieval warfare is rarely that simple. The two armies marched to meet each other, and what came next was a single, horrifically bloody fight that absolutely no one saw coming. All right, so picture this. The date is November 15th, 1325. The place is Zappolino, a battlefield that's practically on Bologna's front porch. For the Bolognese army, this was about defending their home turf. For the Modenese, it was their one shot to land a knockout punch.
So first up, you have the Bolognese army, a massive force, totally confident in their numbers, ready to just crush their smaller rival and get their city's honor back. I mean, they outnumbered the enemy more than 4-1.
And then you've got the Modenese army, severely outnumbered, but they're led by a really cunning and ruthless commander, and they are filled with soldiers fighting for the pride of their city.
What happened next was just a complete military disaster for Bologna. The smaller Modenese force didn't wait around to be attacked, they charged. Their cavalry just slammed into the Bolognese lines, and then, critically, a huge chunk of Bologna's own cavalry panicked and just fled the battlefield. This created a giant hole, morale completely collapsed, and the entire Bolognese army just disintegrated into a full-on rout. It's a perfect example of the chaos of medieval warfare, where shock and discipline could totally overwhelm pure numbers.
The Modenese pursued the fleeing soldiers for miles, cutting them down without mercy.
In just a couple of hours, over 2,000 Bolognese were killed. It was an absolute slaughter and a shocking, humiliating defeat.
So the battle was over, but the story of the bucket? Oh, it was just getting started. Its legacy would end up echoing for centuries.
So, the victorious Modenese army marches back home. And what do you think they're carrying at the head of their procession? You guessed it, the stolen wooden bucket. They paraded it through the streets and then placed it in the city's main bell tower as a permanent trophy of their incredible victory. And get this, a replica is still there today, a 700-year-old reminder of this totally absurd conflict.
And for Bologna, the consequences were just brutal. They had to give up territory, pay these huge ransoms for the thousands of prisoners that were taken, and sign a humiliating peace treaty. So the loss was so much more than just lives. It was a massive blow to their power, their wealth, and their pride. And no, they never got the bucket back.
You know, in the end, that bucket was what filmmakers call a MacGuffin. It's the thing that everybody's fighting over, but it doesn't actually have any real importance on its own. The war was never really about a stolen piece of wood. It was about deep-seated hatred, it was about political ambition, and it was about a culture where your honor was literally worth dying for. The bucket was just the excuse they all needed.
It's a wild story, but it leaves us with a really fascinating question. The War of the Bucket shows how these seemingly trivial symbols can ignite real-world violence when they get tied to deeper issues of identity, honor, and pride. It kind of makes you wonder, what's our modern-day bucket?